Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to today's DevOps.com program, brought to you by Techstrong and Catchpoint. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting program ahead. First, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Our session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope that you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. Over on the right side of your screen, you'll see a couple more options, first of which is the chat tab, and I'd like you to start warming that up for me right now. Let us know from where you are joining. We'd like to get a sense on where in the world everyone is coming from. If you navigate over to that handouts panel, you'll see there are a handful of resources there that have been uploaded and are available for you, so feel free to grab those. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. So our topic today is what the world's SREs know, the 2023 SRE Report. I'm joined by Leo Vasilou, Director of Product Marketing at Catchpoint. I'm also joined by Mark Towler, Product Marketing Director at Catchpoint. So Leo and Mark, thank you both so much for joining me today. Leo, do you want to get this kicked off?
Sounds good, Cody. Thank you for the introduction, and hello, everyone. As Cody mentioned, my name is Leo Vasilou, and it has been my honor and privilege to be one of the primary authors and analysts for both the SRE survey and the SRE report for the last 3 consecutive years. And just want to say thank you for giving us some of your precious time today. I am joined with fellow SRE Report production member Mark Towler. Mark, you mind saying hello?
Absolutely. Thanks very much for the intro, Leo. And thanks very much as well for letting me help out with this year's SRE report. We've been doing this for a while. It's a fascinating process behind the scenes, and we're delighted to be able to present some of the information to you right now. And in fact, speaking of which, let's get the basics out of the way. The SRE report for 2023 is currently available now. You can find it on our website at that link right there, or you can just Google SRE report and Catchpoint, and you'll find it as well. I believe it is also in our handout section. So before you go, what is it that we're talking about here today? You can at least have access to it and get a look at it. And with that said, Leo, let's dive into that a bit. Why are we here, and what is it that we're talking about?
Indeed, Mark. Why are we here? Why do we write this report? Why should people even take the time to listen to us today, right? So, we've written this report for 5 years now, and one of the things we're seeing is the need to make a distinction between this gravity toward the application stack versus the internet stack, right? When the bits and bytes from your application code fly off your servers, there's an entirely separate stack used to deliver those products and services to people wherever they are in the world. And those people, wherever they are in the world, they have different connection types, right? They have different performance profiles depending on what ISPs they use, and combined with the fact that more and more third-party services like CDN, third-party API providers, third-party DNS providers, all those services connect across the internet, and there's a level of fragility and domain expertise, domain discipline in the form of internet performance monitoring, which is separate and distinct from application performance monitoring. And so last year's report, I think our tagline was free to be an SRE. And in this year's report, the tagline was reliable services and resilient internet, or service reliability and internet resilience for all, to sort of further propose that distinction. But as far as the other question, which is like, Leo, why are we really here? Well, it is about helping the business achieve positive outcomes, but more importantly, It is about helping the business achieve positive outcomes through alignment of individual practitioners. In one of the questions we asked in this year's survey, which was an open-ended question because we wanted to give people the freedom to type in anything they want, and boy, did they ever. The question is how do reliability practitioners add value to the business? Parenthesis, for example, do they lower cost? Do they retain existing customers? Do they avoid SLA penalties? Do they increase new logo count? Do they attract top talent? Close parenthesis. And so those anchor bias answers is what we refer to them as, have been bolded here, which give a deeper insight to the question, which means those answers which were not bolded were typed in as free-form answers, and you might say that they have a higher weight than the bolded answers because of that. So in that regard, customer experience, sentiment, and satisfaction at 12.5, which was a non-bias answer, matching the 12.5% for lowering overall total cost, it actually kind of trumps that. So that's the first kind of little author's intent for how to get a deeper insight from this set of data here. And then
Definitely a lot of value here, Leo.
No, I agree. And then the last, just to kind of close out the why, is when we talk about reliability as a feature, we snagged this piece of research from the 2022 State of DevOps research, which came out just before our report. And to help achieve those business outcomes that we were just talking about, the stat here is reliability as a feature practitioners and implementations are a force multiplier with a 1.8x multiplier for helping you meet or exceed your organizational goals. So Mark, that's why we're here. That's why people should give us some of their time today.
That makes absolute sense. If we can promise a set of tools that will let you, or a set of practices that will let you achieve almost 2 times as much success as you're currently getting, that seems like worth spending some time with us. But let's step one step backwards, only because, as you know, I haven't been with Catchpoint that long. You said you've been doing this for about 3 years. What is the history of the SRE report? Because it sounds like we've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, the history of the SRE report. So, started 5 years ago, inspired by the work from Google for bringing SRE to the world. So 3 years ago, which was the first report that I wrote, it was actually a 2-for-1 special because that was the year everyone started working from home. So when we ran our survey data, pre-pandemic, if you will, and then everyone started working from home, before we published that year's report, we actually did another survey after everyone had been working from home for a couple of months. And then last year, we researched this idea of platform operations. And so, what we do each year on the report is obviously we pick a core tenet to research. We pick an emerging or relatively recent trend or topic to research. So, for example, last year was platform operations, and this year was the concept of total experience. And then we also present our distinguished benchmarking data, which we compare to Google's definition of where time should be spent. For example, they talk about the popular 50-50 split of doing engineering work versus operational work, or how much time people should be spending on call. And the last comment I'll mention is that even though we give homage and pay respect to site reliability engineering, we also acknowledge not every business org person realizes or thinks they need to follow the Google definition to the T, and it's okay. And so when we write the survey, we call all reliability as a feature practitioners, and want to stress that SRE overlaps with many other disciplines. So, for example, we've heard many talks about SRE being a subset of a larger DevOps principles and philosophy superset, right? So again, even if you don't have site reliability engineering as a formal title, as a formal discipline, that is okay, because what we discuss is still applicable to all reliability as a feature practitioners. And so if we hop to the next slide, this is the last slide to sort of lay the groundwork and the context before we jump into the insights. And that is the concept of how organizations are classified into either low, medium, high, or elite performing organizations based on how frequently they do deployments, what is the lead time for changes, how many times does stuff break when you push stuff to production, and then how long does it take you to fix stuff when it breaks. And based on how people answer to those questions with the relative timeframes, they get classified as either a low performing, medium performing, high performing, or elite performing organization, which we then use as a dimension to break down answers to some of the other questions.
Let's just stress, when we say elite, we're talking specifically about performance. This doesn't have anything to do with revenue or size or quality even. It's more a matter of how are these organizations and respondents performing within this particular set of narrow dictates that are specifically asking, when it comes to reliability, how are you performing? And that's where we come back to that DevOps report we mentioned earlier. Within the context of that, elite organizations who are able to respond in this way are going to be twice as effective as non-elite organizations. So again, we're using the terminology, but this is not necessarily a value judgment, more a performance judgment.
Yeah, 100%, Mark. And we even go so far as to say in the report is, I forget the exact words, but it was like, don't worry about the vanity label, because there may be some industries, some verticals, maybe government or critical life sciences, life services, that will never be able to classify in a particular category based on how it's defined here, and to not stress about that, right? But rather, for your given use case, how do you compare to other organizations and have the data you need to make your decisions for your business. And if we, without further ado, go ahead and jump into the first insight, now that we know the classification per the DORA 4, let's talk about this one, Mark. Elite performing organizations emphasize customer experience reliability without ignoring the importance of employee experience reliability. What in the heck does that mean? So if we take a moment just to read the chart, basically on the left is the low performing org bucket. On the right is the elite performing bucket. And then within those individual buckets, the question was, how balanced is the focus of external products or service, right? Customer facing products or services versus the reliability focus of internal employee facing tools or systems. And so the buckets, substantial internal skew, some internal, a good balance, some external skew, and then substantial external skew. Look at the shape of that trend line for elite performing organizations, stark up and to the right. And based on that insight and looking at this data, we talk about in the form of our recommendation, this idea of a total experience strategy that creates shared experiences by interlinking user experience, customer experience, multi-experience, linking those disciplines. And we suggest to conduct an inventory and audit of your external reliability activities versus your internal employee facing reliability activities and determine if there's any economy of scales approach, right? So for example, if you have two separate teams doing monitoring, is there an opportunity to combine teams because their subject matter overlaps? But Mark, maybe you could take a second and kind of talk to us about this gap, because it looks like we have our very first question.
That's right, and I'm asking it. The question really is, wait a minute, don't we need a workforce in order to ensure that the customers are having a good experience? What we've learned as well from the SRE report is that when customers are trying to do, when our respondents, I should say, when corporations are trying to do something other than tread water, all right, that means constant improvement. We call that maintain innovation velocity, which is a fancy buzzword of basically saying trying to improve. All right. When you're doing that, and everyone's doing that, if you're just treading water, you're stale or on your way down. If you're doing that, how much of what you're doing to maintain innovation velocity is going to negatively impact employee productivity or negatively impact employee morale? In other words, are you trying so hard to do better for your customers that you're neglecting the employees who are supporting those customers and making their experience better? And a vast majority, just over 56% really, or sorry, 58% are saying that either that happens occasionally or often. And only about 25% are saying that that's seldom or never. So that's a bit of an issue, because one thing we know for certain is that employee satisfaction has a direct impact on customer satisfaction, or old school business talk, ESAT impacts CSAT. We've got a situation where if your customers are, if your employees are unhappy, your customers are going to be happy. And this goes from fast food, where you're going to be less thrilled to be served by a surly clerk who doesn't want to be there, right up to multi-million-dollar solutions that are being sold to you by a workforce that doesn't really like what they're doing. So at all levels, one of the fastest ways to improve the way your customers are experiencing your service or your product is make sure that your employees are also happy and productive and are enjoying what they're doing and are having a good experience. So let's put a pin in that, and we're going to come back to that in a second, because the other thing we want to talk about is an additional insight. Maybe if we look at this, and I know it's an engineering kind of mindset, but maybe there's a way to automate this. What do you think, Leo?
Yeah, so the idea, right, the classic battle, maintaining innovation velocity while also maintaining reliability, and core tenet of wanting to automate all the things, which is a good segue to this critical insight, which is AI is not replacing human intelligence anytime soon. It should be considered within the context of larger observability frameworks. And so,
so ChatGPT isn't going to save us all. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm looking at some of the news articles today about literally about how professors have surfaced a crisis because it's a new way for people to cheat, and it's just like, so maybe there's value to some people there, but kind of going, which goes to this question here is, so first, remember, this year's survey had almost 600 respondents. And the question very simply was, please rate the value from AI ops, artificial intelligence for IT operations. Now, keep in mind, we also asked this question last year, the exact same question, and got the same result. So I just wonder if maybe AI ops is having a bit of an identity crisis. Maybe the marketing rhetoric and what we've been reading about what it can do is outpacing what people are actually able to implement. The other thing that jumps out to me on this slide here is, look at 1/4 of the respondents said unsure. So unsure. And when we look now at this data set, the recommendation we gave is to break down AI ops into its individual capabilities For example, the ability to correlate data, perform root cause analysis, detect anomalies, break down AI ops into some of those individual capabilities, evaluate against existing business use cases, and then audit your available resources, resources to include your people, your tech stack, right? Not just your tech stack there, your processes, to determine which capabilities can be incrementally fulfilled on the path to larger, fuller observability implementations. When determining which capabilities you can incrementally fulfill, the question of what tools will we need, and will we build or buy those tools, are going to be naturally part of that conversation. So we decided to ask those questions. How large of a problem is tool sprawl? And you can see here that despite what has been published in other reports, that the majority of respondents said it's either not a problem at all or is a minor problem, versus tool sprawl being a serious problem. Now, the critical way to think about tool sprawl is the value I receive from the tools greater than the cost of those tools, where the cost can take many forms, right? There's a dollar amount cost, sure, but there's also soft costs like training people, etc. And if somebody said to me, Leo, what is the one thing that really got you hot and bothered from this year's report data, was that previous reports, other reports that I've read in the industry, right, not by us, simply equate tool sprawl to the number of tools in the stack. And it's like, no, please, no. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, we need to add more tools to the stack because we don't have enough. And conversely, nobody says we need to remove tools from our stack because we have too many. But instead, it's compared to the value that they receive. So if you have 100 tools and you're getting 101 units of value, or if you have 1,000 tools and you're getting 1,001 units of value, right? As long as the value you get in return for the cost of them is greater, then there is no tool sprawl problem. And changing topics to the build versus buy. So just reading this chart is the P25 right in the bottom left. So 25% of organizations said they build up to 10% of their tools exclusively in-house. And then right, that middle value, the median, half of the organization said they built up to 30% of their tools exclusively in-house. And then it's cumulative across the different percentiles there for the entire distribution.
Okay, so if we've determined that AI ain't all that, and we've determined that tool sprawl is not as much of an issue as we've been told, why are we now suddenly talking about monitoring and observability?
Right. Yeah. So one of the comments is like, you start with one thing and lead to another. Is that like a little bit of a bait and switch? And it's like, well, everything has a reason. And so, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we always are researching emerging topics, like what's coming next, what's generating some buzz. And so the reason we started with that insight on the data and then changed the recommendation is very simply because we're starting to hear more and more about expanded observability boundaries. We've heard referred to as business level observability, data level observability. And so the idea was that we want to try to attach the conversation to something that's a bit bigger, which means that reliability as a feature, practitioners might have to go outside their comfort zone a little bit and sort of gravitate away from the ostensible definition of observability in the application sense, right? Events, metrics, traces, or logs, metrics, traces, depending on what lexicon you're using. And even though this 100% is not a monitoring versus observability talk, we wanted to try to showcase the difference with one picture. So I think this picture is definitely worth 1,000 words, but otherwise, yeah, it's like we wanted to attach it to an emerging trend that we've been hearing about. But the question is like now, we talked about the value of AI ops, build versus buy, and whether or not tool sprawl is a problem. What happens if different ranks in the organization don't agree on the approaches, which brings us to the next insight we want to explore, which is executives are from Mars and individual practitioners are from Venus. So if we go now, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say it's a flippant way to look at it, but it's something we can definitely we can be humorous and enjoy this a little bit. Obviously, it's not true, but if we look at some of the data, and I don't know, Leo, did you want to go into this, or do you want me to take it from here?
I can just kind of read it, and then love to hear your thoughts on this one, Mark. The same question: please rate the value from AI ops broken down by one end of the spectrum, individual practitioner versus executives, which was the highest rank that we had for this question. And then we did the correlation between the two data sets. So the way to read it is on the left, individual practitioners, that trend line, which by the way, are properly calculated trend lines, right? Skews toward no or low value, whereas for executives, it skews toward moderate or high value. Again, though, also look at the delta in the percent of unsures across the respondent, which again is an insight almost in and of itself. But having read that chart, Mark, why don't you offer your comments? Kind of tell us what we're thinking about or how to think about this.
Well, I was going to mention the big one, and you called it out, but the big one there is the level of insureness. I mean, that's very much individual practitioner, engineering focused. I'm not sure, and I'm not going to commit. Whereas I think just the nature of executives is they're loath to say they're unsure about anything. It kind of comes with the job territory. So that part I can kind of get. But the overall trend, though, is fairly clear. You're showing that the people who are working where the rubber meets the road are going, this isn't doing it. And the executives, and I'm heartened by the fact that there weren't a lot of them going, very, very, very useful, which is fine. But at least they're more interested and they're more open to it. And at first glance, this does give you the whole, one's from Mars, one from Venus. We aren't even on the same planet here. But I think that's actually a miscalculation and a misreading of the data, because at the end of the day, yes, we all are from Earth and we all are human. And in theory, at least, we're all trying to make the business of the organization successful. So we have to be careful because, again, this is based on data we got from over 600 respondents at all levels. We want to make sure that there's an understanding that these barriers, these misunderstandings, these gaps are occurring somewhat naturally. And in this current environment, we shouldn't really have to say anything about the dangers of polarization. It's an issue, and it shouldn't be, and it's something that can be fixed. It's an artificial distinction. It's an artificial gap. Again, at the end of the day, everyone wants what's best for the company because we want the company to do well, or the organization, I should say, to do well, and everyone wants to stay employed and everyone wants to make more money. So how do we look at, and here's another similar graph, this kind of discrepancy? Here's an example where we asked both individual contributors and executives which they prefer. This is nice, simple, no politics, no major stress issue. Would you rather work with Google Workspace or Microsoft 365? And again, we see a similar massive gap. And in fairness, the individual practitioners are pretty much split. There's not a big difference between the two of them, but executives strongly prefer Microsoft 365. And an individual contributor could look at this and go, well, see, they don't know what they're talking about. Google Workplace is so much better. And it's not even necessarily that. All things being equal, we have two different perspectives. The individual practitioners are answering this question based on, does this make sense? Is it easier for me to use? Is it more collaborative? Is it something that can get my job done faster? And the executives have a different mindset. They do care about that. But if there's not a significant difference, the most important thing they're looking at is how much does it cost? How much does it cost to maintain? How easy is it to use? And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing a discrepancy. Now, if you're in an organization where they simply go, no, that's it, throw out Google Workplace, we're all going to use Microsoft 365, you're going to have friction, but there's a way to get around that. And let me give you an example actually from Catchpoint ourselves. We're actually in an almost identical situation to what we're showing here on this graph. We've been using both Zoom and Microsoft Teams as our collaboration tools and online networking tools. And I'll tell you right now, we are 100% remote. We do not really have a headquarters. I have met Leo in face-to-face once or twice, despite working with him constantly for almost a year now. So it matters, and there's always a certain amount of friction and confusion. Are we using Zoom? Are we using Teams? Decision came down from on high, we're using Teams. Now, a lot of people like Zoom, and before they could get their backup, second line in the email was because Teams comes free with Microsoft 365, which we use for everything else. Zoom, we pay for an additional separate license. And that answers the question right now. That big purple line of individual contributors who are all ticked off because their favorite tool is no longer being sanctioned by the company, now they at least have an explanation why. And extrapolating from there, every single one of those changes can be resolved with a bit more communication. And it's much easier to get to a point where you can say, okay, that's why it's been done. That's why the value is there. And hey, maybe we all do live on the same planet after all. So again, I'm coming back to our recommendation, which boiled right down comes down to communicate better and communicate more, and you can resolve a lot of these frictions between the individual contributors and the executives. And that actually links right back to the whole workforce experience and workforce satisfaction versus the efforts that we're putting into making the customers happy.
Yeah, Mark, go back and challenge one thing you said. I think you said something like there's no politic or something like that. And people might be sitting there in the audience saying, what in the heck kind of question is that to be put into a professional piece of research like this? And the reason we decided to include it and also include it in this webinar was because it was the most emotion invoking data set that we showed to our first rounders. I mean, it invoked such like heated passion in the debates. It was just almost uncontrollable. And it's like, yeah, on the surface, it seemed like, a superfluous question, but underneath, it was actually one of the best questions we asked because so many people could make an emotional connection to this versus asking a component versus asking a question about like some technology where maybe people didn't really understand it. Not so with this one. It's like, how do we remove that emotion? And it actually brings us to this next insight, which is, as I mentioned, we talked about researching core SRE tenets. And so this one here is like, how do I say this? With the worldly events that we've been living with for the last year plus, we wanted to reevaluate a cultural aspect, a key cultural aspect of reliability activities, and this idea of operating with a just culture or being blameless. And the insight is that the power of high blameless and valuing post-mortem learnings are characteristics of elite performing organizations, right? Again, remember the DORA 4, and are not tied to company size. And so that is great news. If we take a moment to read this data set here, you can see smaller companies on the left, right? 1 to 100, 101 to 1,000, right? Base 10 all the way up to survey respondents who said they had more than 100,000 employees. The question very simply was, how effectively do you believe you achieve the goal of being blameless or operating with a just culture in your post-mortems? And based on this, the way we kind of talk about the recommendation here is in an environment where the only constant is change, to reevaluate both the written and unwritten rules of the road, especially with respect to embodying a just culture. And SREs have an opportunity to increase and improve both the amount and the reach of value from post-mortem incident reviews, but also even just learning from non-incident reviews, for example, like, hey, we use Google, we want to switch to Microsoft, or hey, we use Microsoft, we want to switch to Google. And if we go now to this next slide, a couple of things. One is there were a handful of other questions we correlated the Blameless answer to. And I highly recommend people read the report because, there's only so many slides we can put into a webinar like this. But the other thing is the delta calculated it. Organizations who operate with a just culture are 500 times more likely to be elite performing organizations. And it's like, wow, with a stat like that, is how do we do blameless? How do we be blameless? And we go into greater detail in the report, but essentially what we're talking about here is your messengers are not shot, right? We're all familiar with that phrase, don't shoot the messenger. Responsibilities are shared. Collaboration is encouraged and rewarded. Information is actively sought. Failures cause inquiry, and new ideas are welcome, right? So again, the idea is reevaluating the idea of being blameless was what we decided to do with this year's SRE report.
There's a reason why we use the word culture in here. Some of this is something that you can establish through process, but a lot of this is something that is a cultural influence. Like, perfect example, I've known engineers who've been fired because they made a mistake that cost the company money, and I've known those same engineers who've gone to another company who've made a mistake, cost the company money, and their manager said, okay, that's a learning experience, now you're not going to do that again, and I'm not going to fire you, because now you know that was wrong, and the next guy's going to come in and he's not going to know what's wrong. We're going to have the same problem. So that's where that's a small example and an anecdote of where blamelessness can come in. But if you look at the knock-on effects from just that one interaction, the guy knows he's not going to be shot if he makes a mistake and costs the company money. He knows not to do that same mistake. He's got a lot more faith and trust in his boss, a lot more customer loyalty, and the boss now knows that he's going to be less likely to make that same mistake again. And if they go through this process, they're going to know, all right, let's prevent that mistake from happening and maybe add a fail-safe or whatever. How do we change the procedures? That doesn't happen if the first response is, you jerk, get out of here. You'll never work in this town again. So the culture is absolutely important. And going way back to that first slide when we talked about SRE doesn't necessarily specifically mean someone with a title of SRE, and SRE overlaps. The SRE practitioner overlaps with a lot of other areas. There's an opportunity for everyone who's covered by this report, everyone who's listening to us now, to influence the culture in their organization towards blamelessness. And again, why? Because it's going to make you 500% more likely to be one of those elite performing organizations.
100% agree, Mark. 100% agree. And, what we want to do now is just kind of work toward wrapping things up. And it's, yes, Mark and I had the opportunity of being on the production team this year, but for the overall report production, there's no way we could have done it by ourselves. So this year's report was written in conjunction, partnership with Blameless, the company, but also, with a foreword by Adrian Cockcroft, who's well known, with a conclusion by a reliability advocate at Google, contributions to the individual insights, right? Like J. Paul, Laura, Niall, Tamara, and then our sponsors for pushing us and giving us the support we need to take the time to focus on this, to write a piece of research. Again, the idea being of helping companies make data-driven decisions. And what I wanted to do here as we work to wrap things up is go back to one of the very beginning slides, which is, yes, it's one thing to sit here and be like, how do we read this graph? Understanding that people are going to look at the data and get their own takeaways or come up with their own takeaways. But just to go back, because it's so important, is we're really talking about aligning with the business and making sure that helping the business make money, attract new logos, retain existing customers, increase efficiencies is what we attach to. And last, we want to say thank you to all of you, to the survey respondents, to the people who give us suggestions on what they want to see researched year over year in these reports. Obviously, we would not be able to do these reports and have these sessions without all of you. So thank you. And Mark, if you want to maybe just talk a little bit about
what I'd like to do is just mention a couple of things too, because we've covered a couple of highlights, but there's a lot more meat to this report. There are a lot more insights that we didn't have time to go over. These are the ones we found particularly interesting, but we strongly recommend you do read the report. It's well worth checking out. Obviously, we're Catchpoint. You're more than welcome to check us out as well. That's why we've got a link to our free trial on our page. But honestly, we're trying to be vendor agnostic, and the report is a good that we want to make available to the entire industry. So please, if nothing else, check that out. We think it's really valuable. And if you have any feedback on it or any suggestions for what you'd like us to ask or research going forward, we'd love to hear that as well. At that point, what I'm probably going to say at this point is we're getting close to our time. Let's wrap this up and give our audience some time to ask some questions. You do have a Q&A tool there on the right of your screen, should be on the right of your screen. Feel free to punch in some questions. We've got some time and we will answer them right now if we can. And if you've got any other questions that you'd like to ask, that you come up with later, feel free to get in touch with us at catchpoint.com. There's a contact us button there as well. So I'll give you a second or two to punch in some questions and then we'll take them. In the meantime, thanks very much. I know some people are going to peel off, but thanks very much for joining us. We really appreciate the time to indulge in our fascination with some of the information we got out of this report.
So Mark, it looks like there's two. The first one is in the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the internet stack. Could you elaborate on that? So, I mean, I guess I can take that one if you want.
Sure. To. I interpret that as, what is that IPM thing you're talking about?
What the internet stack? What is the IPM? Right. So, it's a good question, right? So, APM, right? Application performance, NPM, right? Network performance, ITIM, right? IT infrastructure monitoring. It's a distinction to highlight the need for a specific discipline and the ability to kind of understand how domain expertises interrelate with each other. So again, when your bits and bytes fly off of your server, the bits and bytes generated by your application code, they have to traverse a myriad of components to get to where people are in the world. And the shortest possible answer is those myriad of components that they have to traverse are what we refer to as the internet stack, where that stack may also consist of third-party components, third-party dependencies, where, for example, and these are just examples, you can't install an APM agent, right? So it's like, because of the critical dependency of all of those components, where certain types of monitoring are not able to monitor all of the things, the idea of the internet stack and internet performance monitoring is meant to help people have a conversation where that term encapsulates all of those components and a little bit of the use case.
I'm going to actually jump in there and kind of call us back to one of these earlier slides, which kind of speaks to this. You mentioned APM and NPM and ITIM. These are all solutions that have grown up for basic needs, and the internet's no longer what it used to be. It's no longer a matter of you monitor your servers, you monitor your database, and that gives you most of the information you need. As we saw, that internet stack is just hopelessly complicated, and it's constantly changing at all times. Your network and your experience and your customer's experience is dependent entirely on a million different systems all interrelating and working as they should. NPM or APM are like the picture on the left. I can see that those are cars. I can see that they're beetles. I can see that they're different colors. I don't know if any of them run. All right. IPM gives you more of a level of observability where I can see, okay, I know what the car is. I know what the pieces are. I know its tires are bad. I know we've got a problem with the alternator and there's some electrical issue. I get more information, more observability. And at the end of the day, the whole point is to get you from one place to another. So knowing that is huge. And we see this all the time where we have people going, I don't know why people are having trouble connecting. From where I'm sitting, all my servers are up, all my applications are working, and that's fine. But they're only seeing their local area. They're only monitoring a part of that complicated internet stack, which I should actually bring up on screen as well so people get a better idea of some of the complexity. And again, this is a representation, but every one of these slices can be 3, 5, 100 different items that your network is all dependent upon. And everyone's moved to the cloud. Everything is your network now is the internet for all intents and purposes. And so this is the sort of situation where you need to be monitoring all of this, or there's huge chunks you're going to miss. In
Excellent.
fact, that leads nicely into the next question I see that's come up here, which is how do you measure experience? Which is an excellent question, because that is really what it's all about. If you can get there eventually, is that good enough? Probably not. No one has any patience anymore. You and I both know we've looked at something and it's like, oh, this is taking more than 10 seconds to load. Is there an alternative? And the answer is there always is an alternative. And if you're an organization and your customers are going to wait 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a full minute, they're not going to be your customers. They're going to be your competitors' customers. So experience is absolutely critical. And that applies internally as well. If you've got a Teams meeting and one of our people's in an airport in Dubai and is choppy and can't connect, that's a bad experience. How do we measure that? That's where actually IPM really shines, because what you want to be able to do is track every single, it's reductive to say every single hop, but their entire path all the way through from wherever they are, from their device, all the way through to whatever application they're using and back. And you need to determine what the latency is, what the speed is. Ideally, it'd be really great to see a film strip. So you can know it's like 10 seconds in, what are they seeing? Are they still seeing a spinning ball, or have they actually gotten the information they're looking for? That's absolutely critical. And that's something that a tool like Catchpoint will allow you to do. We talked a bit about data earlier and about how we've got all this data and people will interpret it in different ways. That's the first part of it. We gather every single bit of data possible. The other half is putting that all together into something that's easily readable. So it's not, here's 5,000 data points, you figure it out. What you want is some sort of very simple dashboard that will tell you, or a smart board that will tell you, this is exactly what this customer has experienced or what this employee is experiencing. And we use a tool where we are able to concatenate a whole lot of these measurements into a really simple gauge, which is just customer or employee experience score. And it's an aggregate. It's not designed to be the be all and end all. It's like you can't have one gauge on your car that says working, not working. There's a broader range of stuff you need to know, but it's the same sort of thing where you can go, okay, 98% customer experience, that's good. 50, that's bad. And then you know to drill down and start looking at other things. So it's a long answer, and there's a lot of different ways to do it depending on what kind of experience you're looking at, what the person whose experience is being evaluated is trying to do, where they are. I mean, again, look at that stack. There's a million different things that can impact poor experience. Your CDN vendor could simply not be supporting in that one area. You could have a PGP issue that simply routes you around the other side of the planet, and you're not necessarily going to know because you're sitting here looking at your Microsoft Teams solution in your office and going, looks good to me, but that's not tracking experience. And you're going to find out when your people are unhappy and your customers are leaving. Which rambled a bit, but sorry, I hope we answered that question.
Thank you, Mark. So looking at the Q&A, so it looks like Cody, our behind the scenes moderator, was able to answer one question, was, will the presentation be provided after completion? The answer is yes. Looks like there's another question.
It's in the handouts right now, by the way. You can download it right from there.
So this next question is why is this report different from other reports in the industry? So that's a good question. And, I guess there's probably three things, maybe four, that I would say. So first is, don't be fooled by the fact that my title is product marketing. So I ran production, IT, and operations for almost 20 years before I moved to the dark side. So the first thing that comes to mind is this year's report was written by current and former reliability practitioners. I had the wonderful opportunity, if we go back to the acknowledgement session, to work with a gentleman by the name of Kurt Anderson. So that's probably the first difference. The second thing that comes to mind is, if we look at any of these charts, the correlation and advanced visuals are the deepest that we've seen, in the fact that we do the multi-dimension comparisons and present that data, where a lot of the other reports that I read, talks about averages, which, based on the second insight of the gap, can be sometimes misleading. And then the third thing that comes to mind is, for SRE, this is the longest running dedicated research of its kind, with the exception of Google themselves, obviously. And then I think the fourth thing is really just the researched topics would be different, which I don't know if, depending on what you meant as a differentiator. But so this year, for example, we researched AI ops, tool sprawl, build versus buy, looked at total experience, Blameless, whereas other reports on reliability, maybe they research like how to manage incidents or something like that. So those are the things that come to mind when I hear the question, what's different about this report? It looks like
we also like to consider we might be a little bit more accessible. If there's something you want research, let us know, because we do try to have different themes, as opposed to, what are the top most important things to SREs and that sort of thing. We want to take a more holistic view. We had 600 some odd participants this year, over, I've forgotten how many questions, Leo?
It depends if you include the things like how big is your business, or
right,
what country.
Right, but yeah, regardless, we had a lot of questions, and we could easily have done 10 times as many questions to be more specific. There's a balance between what people are willing to answer and how much time they're willing to give us. And again, we really appreciate it, because it does take some time to fill out the survey. The point being, though, we're a bit more flexible, and we're not trying to be the be all and end all, and we're trying to find out what's interesting and what's useful to people at any given year. Leo mentioned the whole hybrid issue, where we actually did a secondary follow-up survey on, hey, everyone's now working from home. How's that impacting you? So that's kind of where we focus. We're not necessarily trying to be Gartner and do the industry standard and and that sort of thing. We don't have the budget, and also it gives us more freedom to do the things that are interesting. And that's where, again, we did a call out. If there's something you want to know about, you want us to research in next year's, let us know. I'll put it on Leo's list.
I say, come on, Mark. Gartner, or I don't know if we can say names. So analysts, they're not going to say, do you prefer Google or Microsoft?
Exactly.
The other tactical question we said was like, do you prefer Teams or Slack? And last year we said, do you prefer Mac or PC? Right? It's like, they're not going to, right?
That one is a religious war.
So I think maybe one more question. I think it's the last one. And then we can call it a wrap, unless any others come in. But this question says, as we are learning that SRE interacts with Agile and DevOps, how can we better distinguish DevOps and SRE? I've heard multiple subject matter experts who know way more about this stuff than I do, right? People like Liz Fong, Steve McGee, talk about, and this is just an example since it was mentioned explicitly in the question, right? If DevOps is a set of larger philosophies, principles, then talking about, achieving outcomes, obviously, then SRE is a specific implementation of those larger philosophies and principles. As far as the distinction between the two, I've read the Google SRE, the first book, right, written by Niall and team, probably 3 times through and through at this point. And I just love how they took those larger principles and put specific implementation guidelines around them. So I would say start there, and then maybe I can find like some of the videos where they talk about the relationship between them. And the God's honest truth is they will do a better job of it than me. But again, broadly, it's a SRE is a implementation of those larger philosophies and principles. And that's kind of why we put this slide in here in the first place, because of the overlap. And even if you don't have the specific SRE title or specific SRE implementation, that the desire to have reliability be a force multiplier is still consistent across, across these bubbles here. And Mark, unless I'm missing them, I don't see any other questions. So
I think that's definitely going to be all the time we are going to have anyway. We're coming up on close to the end of the hour, and we want to be respectful of the time that everyone's given to us. So again, thank you very much for your attendance and for joining us. And if other questions come up to you, feel free to send them over to us at Catchpoint. You can go to our website right there, catchpoint.com, and there's a contact us button. We will be more than happy to reach out and help you out if you've got any questions.
All right, Mark, Leo, thank you both so much for everything today. I really appreciate the time that you take out of your schedule to put together these presentations and then to come and bring it forth to us in this live environment. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I'd love to remind our audience that our session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch, and I'm sure you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. We do still have those 4 gift cards to give away, and our winners are Lisa or Liza M, Travis H, Ram I, and Ara M. So to our 4 winners, keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card, but if you don't happen to see that, please do check your spam folder. I'd like to thank Catchpoint for sponsoring our program today, and I'd like to thank Catchpoint for sponsoring our program today, and to Mark and Leo, thank you so much. Leo, did you have something to add before we close out?
I am generally humbled and appreciative of the support we get for writing this beast of a piece of research year over year. We try to preserve the sincerity and authenticity and agnosticity, I suppose, of the data. And just want to say thank you again, and thank you for everyone giving us your time today.
Great. Thank you so much. And so to echo that to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate and value your time. And we also really value your feedback. As soon as we close out, there will be a survey that will pop up on your screen. Let us know what you thought about our program today, or maybe what you'd like to see on an upcoming program. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now all disconnect. Mark, Leo, thanks.
Cheers, team.
Thank you. Have a good one.